In 1983, while visiting the nation of Greece, I had the privilege of touring the ruins of the Temple of Apollo near Delphi, sometimes pronounced Delphi in English. Not much remains of its earlier majesty. A few spare columns have been erected from the remains that stand on the side of Mount Parnassus. Sparse wildflowers dotted the rocky hillside that rose in dramatic relief beside the once sacred place. Scraggly pines and other scattered underbrush still attempt to encroach on this historic site. As you visit this place, it's easy to wonder what had drawn men and women, both common and royal, to this out-of-the-way location. Only time and scientific inquiry would reveal some of the secrets that lay buried beneath its decaying remains for centuries. Modern studies have probed the mysteries of Delphi and its mystical allure. History tells us that leaders such as Alexander the Great made pilgrimages to hear from the oracle who resided there. Her reputation for accuracy was such that for many centuries it continued to draw those seeking answers that they might hear from the world beyond. Mysterious it certainly was. At the center of this cult was a priestess who, under the influence of strange vapors rising out of the earth, would give unusual utterances. Recent scientific research has shown that indeed gases similar to those used in surgical anesthesia could actually have been present at this site in those times. The oracle, known as Pythia, would babble in strange languages, and then the priest, standing in waiting, would interpret her messages in these strange tongues, delivering the answers to those inquiring. A point of interest is how the Greek language describes these vapors. They were called the pneuma, the very breath of God, the divine wind. It's interesting to note that the writer of the New Testament uses the word pneuma to describe the Holy Spirit. God's Spirit is certainly not some strange vapor from the earth, but truly the divine breath that can inspire and proclaim God's truth in a way that will answer the heart cry of a generation seeking answers. Perhaps it was reflecting on this sort of phenomenon that the Apostle Peter wrote that those speaking for God must be oracles. Those who are filled with the holy pneuma, the breath of God, were to speak as though God were speaking through them. In 1 Peter 4:11, Peter gives us this message: "If anyone speaks, let him speak as the oracles of God." In the Living New Testament, we read it this way: "Are you called to preach? Then preach as though God Himself were speaking through you." God's church is to be a prophetic minority. We are to stand and speak to a generation of seekers with the confidence and boldness of true oracles. Yet you may ask, where do we get the power to work this way? And are there dangers associated with such power? I will investigate such challenges as we explore this issue later in this series, but I encourage you to be bold in these days. We are truly in a day of spiritual famine. People are hungry for a word from the Lord. Step out into the twilight and see God meet you there with His power, signs, and wonders. A point of interest is how the Greek language describes these vapors. They were called the pneuma, the very breath of God, the divine wind. It's interesting to note that the writer of the New Testament uses the word pneuma to describe the Holy Spirit. God's Spirit is certainly not some strange vapor from the earth, but truly the divine breath that can inspire and proclaim God's truth in a way that will answer the heart cry of a generation seeking answers.